confidence is a belief that you can do something. So it's not self-esteem, which is your self-evaluation, which can actually cause more problems than it solves. And it's not optimism. Optimism is a kind of passive belief that things will turn out well. What confidence is the belief that you can do something, and that if you do that thing, the outcome you desire will happen. It acts as a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ian Robertson, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a while since I first wanted you to come on, and you're very good for agreeing to do it, even though you couldn't do it at the time. So I think we're probably nearly a year since I first reached out to you.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for doing it.
It's great to talk to you. Yeah.
So to start off with, just want to start with confidence and how confidence works. And could you, I suppose, just give your definition of confidence for the audience, and then we can kind of get into it from there.
Sure. So confidence is a belief that you can do something. So it's not self-esteem, which is your self-evaluation, which can actually cause more problems than it solves. As anyone who's worked with an egotistical person who can distort businesses to protect their self-esteem. And it's not optimism. Optimism is a kind of passive belief that things will turn out well. And what confidence is the belief that you can do something, and that if you do that thing, the outcome you desire will happen. None of that with certainty, of course. And it acts as a self-fulfilling prophecy. For reasons in the brain that I can explain later on.
Yeah, what's the self-fulfilling prophecy part is the bit that's most interesting to me, because I think this is completely anecdotal, but I've spoken to hundreds of business people, whether it's on this podcast, probably thousands over my career so far. And I think the one thing that really separates the really successful people in their field versus the maybe successful or are not so successful is this kind of belief that they can do it, right? And I think even in the past, as I was growing up, there were some people in my life that I thought were delusional. I thought that person just, I don't know where they get the self-belief from, because they just have it. And actually, it has kind of materialized what they said they were going to do, And I think that concept, I think, will be familiar to people just anecdotally in their own lives. Could you talk a little bit more about that, and just a little bit about why that's the case?
If you believe you can do something. Now, I have to say, confidence is not domain general. It's fairly domain specific. So you can be confident in business, but not confident socially. You can be confident academically and not confident in sport. And the reason for this is that the secret sauce of confidence is it's linked to action. It's linked to the action systems of the brain. And so when you believe you can do something, and that the outcome you want is likely to happen, then your brain treats that as if you had actually done it. It's like a simulation. And so your brain responds with a mini success experience, which is driven by something called the winner effect in the brain, which essentially says that the secret of success is success. Because if you achieve a success, that slightly increases statistically your chances of a subsequent success. And that works like compound interest. It works exponentially. And that's why you will see this link between confidence and success in business, is because of these incremental effects. So let's take an example away from business. Let's take two 5-year-old girls of equal IQ, equal academic ability, equal backgrounds, but one of them is slightly more confident in school, for instance, than the other. So that child who's slightly more confident is more likely to ask the question of the teacher, to try the thing that seems hard, but to try it. And because they're more likely to take action like that, they're more likely to get a success experience. And so that means they're more likely then to do a subsequent question or action. And then so that's a geometric progression. That's an exponential function. So by the time these two kids are 25, there'll be a big gap between the two in achievement in that domain. The same things can happen socially, domains, the same things can happen in sport. And of course, many other factors play in these things. So we're talking about with all other things being equal. So let's go back to business. If you believe that you can do something, the first thing is to create a success experience. The worst thing you can do is to say, I'm going to be a Fortune 500, business leader, or I'm going to make 100 million, or I'm going to be the market leader. These big goals are good to energize you, but if you rely on that, and this is why manifesting is really neuroscientifically not really, doesn't make sense. If you manifest some distant goal like that, actually you're less likely to achieve it. Because the critical thing about goals is they have to be within this proximal zone, the Goldilocks zone of not too easy, not too hard. Okay, so so that's why people can end up being Walter Mitty characters, forever fantasizing this. I'm going to win an Olympic medal, or I'm going to be this, or I'm going to be that. That your brain begins to treat them as if you'd actually done them. And your brain then relaxes, said, we've done them. They don't have to do the work in between. And so fantasists often are much less likely to achieve their goals than people who are more focused on the proximal goals, on the process. So that's why, that's why intrinsic. Sorry, on you go. Yeah.
No, I was as you were talking there were a couple of things, but firstly, how I for one find it very difficult to find that zone, right? Because sometimes if I set a goal that's too easy and too short term, maybe it doesn't maybe excite me as much.
Precisely.
But then
Precisely.
then I'm off the other end as to, really exciting and really big, which naturally takes time. So how do you kind of advise that to find the right zone?
You have to know what you're aiming for, and that can be quite big. But the critical thing is to try and make the goals intrinsic rather than extrinsic. It's like a kid can say, I want to be top of the class in maths, or they can say, I want to be really good at maths. These are two different motivations. If you say, I want to be really good at maths, that should then trigger a set of, well, okay, if I want to be really good at maths, I then have to set these less exciting proximal goals. And hopefully you enjoy the process, that you're not just focused on some distant outcome. Because if you do that, the chances are you won't achieve that outcome, and you will not get the reward experiences, and you will feel the opposite of a winner effect, the opposite of confidence. So the critical thing about confidence is it presupposes that you can create success experiences for yourself. Okay, it presupposes that you define your goal in that goal sweet spot. If you're 100% certain you can do something, then you don't need confidence. Confidence is about bridging uncertainty, and everything involves a risk. Everything that stretches you involves a risk. The risk that you will fail, and confidence allows you that failure is like a river you're crossing, and confidence is the bridge that takes you across that river, where you do it in spite of the uncertainty of whether you will do it or not. You're pricing in the uncertainty. in saying, I think I can, yes, I think I can do it. You're saying I can do it, but in there is the anxiety that comes from not being certain you can do it. And if you do things in spite of anxiety, if you take action in spite of anxiety, that's a really powerful stimulant to confidence. Similarly, doing things in spite of adversity is a very powerful stimulant to confidence. Whereas doing things that are dead easy, you're not anxious about, you're certain about, that doesn't build your confidence, because that's not what confidence does. And what confidence does is has 5 effects on your mind and brain. First of all, confidence makes you more likely to take action, to do the thing. We know that people who are anxious a lot of the time they do less of everything in every domain of their lives. That's what anxiety does. It makes you pull back. Confidence is the greatest antidote to anxiety. So confidence makes you more likely to take a step forward. As the Afghanistani Persian poet Rumi said, the path only appears with the first step. You have to take action, and that immediately takes you forward to a place. You might not necessarily know where you're going, but the fact you're now in a different place, having taken that step forward, and new experiences, new insights, new percepts, new meetings will be more likely to come to you, which will then generate the greater likelihood of a subsequent. So another effect of confidence is it's a natural antidepressant, because your brain treats the belief that you can do something as if you've done it. That releases a little bit of dopamine in the brain's reward network, and that dopamine serves both as an anti-anxiety, antidepressant. It's a mood elevator, but it's also an anxiety reducer. So this belief is, it kind of dampens down the anxiety, lifts your mood, makes it more likely you'll take action, and it increases motivation. Okay, increase your motivation. And the people with the light in their eye, that that are kind of highly motivated and confident they can do things. All of these are self-reinforcing cycles. All of these 3 components. Fourth component is the increased dopamine in the reward network actually particularly affects the frontal lobes, and so it makes you a little bit mentally sharper. Okay, so it makes you a little bit sharper, and so able to think on your feet, able to sort out problems, to come up with creative insights, etc. And finally, and possibly the most important, because all of our activities involve interacting with other human beings, is it makes you more influential. It makes you more persuasive because it raises your status. We human beings have a primitive tendency to accord higher status to people who appear confident. So people will listen to you more and more likely to do what you want, which of course in business is just critical.
As you were talking there, and I was thinking earlier when you were explaining the winner effect. So success is more likely to come if you've had a smaller success in the past. Basically, I'm kind of I might not be spot on there, but I'm roughly around. I think then maybe of something like the financial crash, where people had one success and then they said, wow, that's pretty good. And obviously their confidence would have grown. But what else is going on there that kind of leads to maybe overconfidence and kind of poor decision making?
Yeah. Well, anything that has powerfully positive effects can have powerful negative effects. So nuclear energy could save us from global warming, but it's also got terrible potential. And confidence is such a powerful phenomenon in the human brain and mind that you can have too much of it, because of its exponential effects. Because the winner effect which is its engine, operates in this exponential way, that the likelihood of success progressively increases the more success you have. It really a lot of people with that confidence and with the right opportunities. It's not all there's too much uncertainty in the world, to markets, timing, all of these things. But we're talking statistically here, confidence will more likely create success. And then if that success keeps multiplying, then it's very, very common for people who experience this success. One of the traps of it is you start to attribute that success to some wonderful internal capacity in you. And you see it on Dragon's Den and business programs, a business, usually a man more than a woman, but it can be both either, who just, they're so delighted with their own success. They think it's this special quality in them. And it's just such a delusion, because there was 100 other equally talented, hardworking, persistent, creative people than them who just, luck plays a huge part in this as well. Luck. But as I can't remember who says that the harder I try, the luckier I get. The fact is, because confidence makes you more likely to take action, if you hit failure, you don't have luck, you're more likely to try in another domain, and therefore you are more likely to become successful. And so the risks, the downsides of excessive confidence are the same, so very similar to the effects of excessive power on the brain. And we see various world leaders now whose behavior follows certain patterns. They become extremely narcissistic. They confuse their own interests with those of the country or company they're leading. Their judgment starts to become distorted, because when you get too much dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, it scrambles your judgment. Their risk perception becomes really low. They start to treat other people as objects, and they lose self-awareness. These are all, confidence is a two-edged sword. And what we're talking about here is overconfidence. And overconfidence has caused deaths of tens, hundreds of millions of people in history. It's caused many crashes. It's caused aircraft to crash, drivers to crash, wars, invasions to happen, whether it's Napoleon in Russia or Russia in Ukraine, or Trump in Venezuela. He didn't have the disaster that Napoleon and Hitler has, but for sure he's going to overreach, with this excess of confidence and all the greed the greed for more that comes with it, because it's a quasi addictive process where you need more and more to achieve the same hit. That's why being motivated by extrinsic goals like status, competitive, beating others, status, money, these are all much more addictive goals than wanting to be really good at what you do, wanting your company to being proud of what your company does, being proud of building market share. All of these things are more intrinsic goals, and they're less addictive. So you're less likely to suffer the downsides of confidence if you have these intrinsic rather than extrinsic goals, and your mental health will be much better as well.
Do you come across what you might call magical thinking a lot? I mean, I've fallen victim to it. I think earlier on, when you were saying, when you were talking about manifesting, the part that always kind of that didn't really materialize right for me was because I'm confident, or because I believe that this will happen, it will. Almost like, if you believe you can, or you can't, you're right. And I think there's some truth in it, but because of, as you said yourself, opportunity, or just basic luck and unpredictability, these things alone can't really explain success as a whole.
No, and that's why the absolute critical capacity here is being skillful at goal setting. and allowing yourself to be energized by if you like, the big fantasy, allowing yourself, because that boosts your motivation, but you must immediately slot in to then uh, implementing problems or practical mode. Okay, I would like to be a world beating athlete, but the okay, that excites me, that prospect of competing in the Olympics or whatever. But hold on a minute, what's my target here now? Sonia O'Sullivan, the Irish middle distance runner, she told me how she really had huge expectations of her in the Atlanta Olympics many years ago, and she just performed abysmally, completely disappointed everyone, including herself. And she told me that failure experience, which wasn't at all pleasant, but what she did in response to that, she just kind of forgot about Olympic medals, forgot about these big fantasies, and just went back to Saturday road racing in London, where she was living at the time. And her goal then became, I'm going to knock a couple of minutes off my time this Saturday. She got satisfaction from that, but she just scaled back from the big ambitions and just homed in on the satisfaction of the process of the improving of her personal time, forgetting the competition medals and all that. And she built herself way back. Many people would have maybe given up after such a setback, after public kind of humiliation of defeating the expectations of thousands of people. And she just gradually, her attention was just focused on the next goal, not on any, and then she ended up getting a silver medal in Sydney, and she should have got a gold medal. I think there was some naughty drugs involved in the person who won.
Tell me about you, Ian. So how did you start studying confidence, and I suppose why write a book on it? Why did it kind of grab you and grab your passion?
Well, my wife, Fiona Doherty, was a brilliant clinical psychologist. She, ever since I met her, she said to me, if you can give a child confidence, there's really nothing else you need to give them, that confidence. And it was she who hammered into me the idea that confidence was absolutely critical in all sorts of domains. And it was she who suggested I should write a book on it. And when I started to look into the research on confidence, I became really fascinated by it, and then you start realizing that you cannot listen to a post-match or anyone talking about any sport without hearing the word confidence, coming up. You can't, in economics, you hear confidence all the time. In politics, you hear confidence. It's ubiquitous, and that's because it is this, uranium of the human mind. Yeah.
Why is it so important for children? Why is it so important to try and give children confidence?
Because it's the engine of them developing and learning and developing, including learning and developing your ability to handle your own emotions, your own thoughts, always requires that you push yourself a little bit, that you're not sitting back always just comfortable. You're pushing the limits a little bit. Okay, trying out something else, trying to walk along the wall, and yeah, you might fall off and scrape your knee, but you're always trying different things. And that means, to the extent, the more domains you have confidence in, the more likely you are to be pushing the limits, the greater your learning will be, because the greatest source of learning is mistakes. But if you're dominated by anxiety rather than confidence, you will be holding back and not taking actions that will have the risk of making mistakes, if you like. You will be always worried. Your attention will be more focused on making the mistakes, on the downsides and potential, than it is on the potential rewards. So it's an orientation towards building that sense of satisfaction from achievement, if you like, that has this exponential quality. And when kids, you might find you're doing algebra hard, and at first you find the algebra hard in school, and there's an awful tendency just to say, oh, I can't do maths, or shying away from it because it's hard. But if you've got confidence in that domain, you're more likely to keep at it, and then you will understand it better. And once you understand it better, that will take you forward. And that's why in areas, children who lack confidence don't develop their cognitive academic abilities nearly as well. And similarly, socially, kids who respond to rejection by a group, respond to it by internalizing it and saying, oh, something wrong with me, they will tend to become socially avoidant and not kind of try out and stretch themselves to meet other people, etc., and become more isolated. Whereas kids who are confident are much more likely to say, oh, to attribute that setback to either randomness or the unpleasantness of the group they were in, and they will say, oh, they don't internalize it into something wrong with them, and they say, okay, I'm going to try it. And if they've got confidence socially, they will try out and more likely to make other relationships.
I have a son who's just turned 3, and I mean, we don't do very technical things at home. I might try teach him, how to count to 10 and things like that. Or we might be building some blocks. And sometimes he says to me, "Oh, you do that. I can't. I can't." And he kind of, he won't even listen to me. Now he's very young, and we do try to tell him, you can. But what are some ways that the parents could maybe coach their children and kind of give them a bit more confidence?
By engineering situations where they do it, by just encouraging them to try, and engineering it so that the kid, even if they don't do the thing perfectly, they get a sense, oh, I did that. I got that. And the other thing is, you have confidence is in the domain of uncertainty and risk. You have to accept risk. So it's letting your kid walk to the shops, not at 3, but letting your kid walk down to the shops, not, letting them, we know that kids who have a Saturday job, for example, end up much more emotionally robust when they're young adults than kids who don't have a Saturday job. Why? Because when you've got a Saturday job, you're maybe not just meeting nice kids like yourself, you're running into people, people are not being all nice and protective to you like your family and their friends are. You're suddenly people are maybe speaking harshly to you. So there's an emotional robustness develops there. So and doing stuff in spite of setbacks, or in spite of things that are not all hunky dory, getting through them and doing the stuff is a huge stimulant to confidence. That's why in the American venture capitalists, they really want to see people whose businesses have failed. They want to see the scars in the back. Whereas in Europe, we have a very unhealthy attitude towards business failure, But we know that in the brain and the mind, failure is a much better teacher than success is.
I don't know quite what it is, and maybe you'll be able to tell me, but you're very good. For someone who I suppose an academic, you're very good at explaining these concepts in a way through stories. Might have something to do with your Scottish accent. It's just very easy to listen to. Was that something that you had to consciously improve upon in your own life, or is it kind of an innate ability to be able to communicate these things?
Nothing's innate. Nothing we do is 100% innate. Everything's a product. we only have 20,000 genes. And that number of genes is computationally impossible for it to code all our behaviors. Our genes evolved for our brains to be plastic. That is, for our brains to be changeable by experience. So yes, there are some genetic propensities, very crude propensities, but who we are and what we can do and what we cannot do is hugely determined by our experiences, our learning, and our mental approach to what we're doing. So no, this is just something I was a teacher for a couple of years, 3 years, and in South Seas, and I've done a lot of writing for the various newspapers. So you just gradually realize you get in the habit of trying to put yourself in the mind of who's listening to you or who's reading, and not, as some academics do, overestimating what your listener or your reader's understanding or knowledge is about what you're talking about.
I often ask a version of that question as to, is that something you've had to learn the hard way, or have you, do you think that's innate? And I can't really think of an example now where someone has said, "Oh, that's innate. I was born with that." But that's the first time someone's given me an actual scientific answer, and so I now no longer need to ask that,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
anyone else.
yeah, yeah. No, nothing's 100% innate. No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all nonsense.
So
Yeah,
tell me, so this idea of self-knowledge, right? That I suppose
yeah.
people put a lot of importance in, and I suppose learning about oneself, is that a kind of a fool's errand in a way?
No, no, not at all. Self-awareness is pretty critical, particularly when it comes to interacting with other people. In all businesses, you have to interact with other people, and so you have to be able to understand and kind of read other people as well. And if you don't understand yourself, then you will behave in ways that elicit reactions from other people that you might not understand because you don't understand their reaction to you. So no, self-understanding, um, and as Robert Burns, the great Scottish poet, said, to see ourselves as others see us is a huge um, necessity for all human endeavors, is to have some reasonably accurate perception of yourself, to understand yourself. And related to that is, to be able to decenter from yourself, to not take yourself too seriously, to um, to a certain extent, the human brain has this capacity to think about yourself thinking, or to watch yourself watching, or to hear yourself speaking. And that kind of slight decentering has been shown to really benefit people emotionally and behaviorally, because otherwise what that does is, when the red mist comes down, or you either of fear or of rage or anger or outrage or humiliation, your brain just it loses its capacity to see things proportionally and in context, and you can end up saying things or doing things that you later regret. And during that time, when you're doing that, you're completely of no self-awareness. You're completely focused on this consuming emotion that fills your mind and um, shapes your thoughts, and creates thoughts that reinforce the injustice, or this that's happened to you, or the fear, and then you completely lose the ability to see the wood for the trees and see the context. Whereas if you've developed the habit of decentering, have been rightly, slightly kind of skeptical, not quite skeptical, but kind of, yeah, yourself is great, Ian, but you know what? It's actually just a collection of thoughts and memories and habits, And there you go, you're saying that thing again, and there you are going. So that kind of ability to decenter from our, the self, the ego is a necessary tool. It's a necessary tool, but it's a pretty buckety old provisional architecture that, like an old car you're driving, and you can have affection to it, but you realize it doesn't, has its faults and flaws and can break down. So if you can have that kind of slightly rueful, amused, friendly relationship to yourself, it does protect you from the becoming consumed by these strong emotions, and help you have greater self-awareness at these critical times when of conflict or of difficult decisions or of uncertainty or of crisis.
Yeah, you spoke, and I'm not sure if these two stories are connected, but you spoke in the book, about a girl who had she had lost a lot of her confidence, as a young girl, because her brother was kind of very academic and kind of excellent in school, and her parents was kind of a little bit disappointed by this, and then over time she had kind of lost her confidence, and you were talking about defensibility. And when someone will try and protect their ego, rather than kind of try earnestly at something and fail. And what can help that? Just to give the example to the listeners, um, the she had a job interview set up, and she arrived half an hour late, and she didn't get the job, and it was kind of a self-sabotaging moment, almost to protect her ego. And if I remember correctly, what can help in this situation, and what helped her, was confirming to herself how in other parts of her life, I can't remember the word you used for it, but how in other parts of her life she could say, well, but I'm actually very, I'm a very kind person, right? And I might not be that good, and that sort of helped. Is that related to what you're talking about
Well,
now?
that's something called self-affirmation, which the psychologists in Rochester, Deci and Ryan, developed. The idea being that our self-esteem, which is different from confidence, but our self-esteem, our self-evaluation, essentially deep down is about our values. Who are we? When it boils down to it, who we are, what do we stand for? Our values are what defines us at root. Even if we lose sight of them and don't articulate them, and we can often go far away from them, but we know from studies of obituaries, when you get people to rank or to rate their admiration for people whose obituaries have been written, people they've never been heard of. So you get them to rate the status of that person, and you have in the obituaries a range of things from achievements, qualities like good humor, witty, hardworking, or great success, rich, wonderfully, wrote fantastic books, whatever it is. But what people base their ratings on, it turns out, is the moral qualities, the virtues. It was the honesty, it was the bravery, it was the courage, it was um, the kindness, it was the moral qualities on which people based their assessment of a stranger who had died life. And that is true of all of us, in everyday life, living people. Essentially, we trust people on the basis that we perceive their value, we share the same values. We trust because we perceive shared values. So shared values are the ground rock of the ego, of the self-esteem. So what Deci and Ryan suggest, if our ego is threatened, say, by criticism, by potential humiliation, by failure, we tend to respond defensively to that. Our brain tries to ward off these feelings, to control the emotions, to shy away from this threat to the ego. But if you do this exercise of self-affirmation before something like that happens, and what does that mean? It means saying, giving people a whole list of values and saying, what are your top 5 values? What are your values? Who are you as a person? What are your values? And then just spend a couple of minutes writing down why you hold these values and what they mean to you and how they operate in your life. And so you bring these things into conscious mind by dwelling on them for a little while. And then you present people with a threat to their ego, a humiliation, a criticism, or something like that. They respond much less defensively. Their brain's emotion networks show much less of an activation. So that's why, and of course, values are at the heart of driving intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. The values have been, conspicuous consumption of high status, of nice, fast cars. These values are, A, they're more addictive, but B, they make your ego more vulnerable, not more secure. Whereas intrinsic values to do with your essentially virtue and moral qualities, trustworthiness, honesty, hardworking, fantastic family person. If these things are articulated, the thing about the ego is we're all going to die. And self-esteem is to try and ward off that terror of extinction. But when you articulate your values are eternal. Values don't die. So what you're doing is buying a little bit of immortality when you affirm your values, which makes your ego more secure and less likely to bristle and panic or be furious in response to stimuli.
So Ian, we've talked a lot about confidence, right, and how to get more of it. If I can just think back over our conversation now as to the things you've said as to where we can kind of grow in confidence, where we can get more confidence. Number one is having goals that are intrinsic rather than extrinsic. Setting goals that are a stretch, but in some way achievable, not too far off, not too big, not too dreamy. What else? What else can we do? And I remember in the book there's a brilliant story about Padraig Harrington, and I don't know if that comes into this, but what else can we do to grow in confidence?
Well, it hugely depends on what we pay attention to, and that relates to the goals, because Padraig Harrington, he famously hit a ball twice into the river when he was about to win the Open, and his caddy walking out of the fairway because he was feeling humiliated and like a failure, and his caddy just kept saying to him, "You're the best chipper and putter in the world. You're the best chipper and putter in the world." And he came to he chipped well, he putted well, and he ended up squaring the match and then beating Sergio Garcia and winning the Open. And that was only because he'd managed to take his attention away from the claret jug, the great victory, which, of course, when you think about great victories, your brain will automatically throw up thoughts of great failure, great success. So his caddy managed to hack into his brain and control his attention. So all he was thinking about, all he was paying attention to was something he'd done thousands of times brilliantly before. And he had this proximal goal of just chipping this ball and then putting this ball. And so his brain wasn't disrupted by all these big thoughts that would have increased neurotransmitters like noradrenaline in his brain and scrambled the delicate elite circuits that perform so well. So the critical thing is your emotions, and therefore your emotions depend on what you're paying attention to. And so if you allow your brain, if you allow the technology lords to take control of your attention for their own profit, and if you're a slave to alerts and external scrolls and external demands on your attention, your ability to be pilot of your own attention and feed your brain with the information you want it to have, not with what they want it to have. The extent you can do that, that will give you confidence. Mainly because you're going to be more likely to do things towards the goals you want to achieve.
I'm wondering, has studying this and has that increased your confidence? Because even just reading the book, I think, and especially with the quadrant of can do, can happen. If I can convince myself, if there's something that I'm just, I'm not sure that I've, if I've come up against it, or it's a challenging thing for me, if I can convince myself, rationally speaking, that I can do it, right, and that it can happen, or could happen, I think is the quadrant. Um, that for me, I absolutely feel more confident and more able to take action. Has that been the same for you as you studied it?
I'd say so. Yes. It really has taken me across the bridge of uncertainty. You know, you can't be certain that you can do this thing. You're more likely to try. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does. But if the confidence allows you to keep trying. And also, there've been long periods, say various books I've written. There've been periods when I haven't been able to persuade my agent that I have a sellable book, but you 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 have the confidence that you can come up with something that's of value of interest, and so it helps you persist, even persist through non-reward, to keep doing the Rumi and taking a step without quite knowing where it's going, keeping writing, keeping trying, keeping reading, keeping going. And that's what many business people, I'm imagining most business people have had to do that, pivot, try one area, then, oh goodness, I'll have to try another. And nobody would start a business. Nobody would start to go into business on their own without confidence, because most businesses fail. Now, what they don't say when they say that statistic is designed to kind of put people off. What they don't say is, yeah, but some of these businesses that fail, the people that have failed go on to do other businesses that succeed, and it's that quality of confidence. And for sure, in my own life, and I was so acutely aware of it with my children and grandchildren in particular, to make sure that they, where at all possible, acquire this invaluable resource.
We've talked a lot today, and I've spent so much time kind of researching and listening to other podcasts you've been on, and other interviews, and reading your book, that I'm not sure if we've covered everything. So from your perspective, is there anything that you think is important that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with people?
Well, I just say one last thing, which is about confident aging. And I'd say that's one area that definitely affected me. That so many people uh, from 50 on sabotage themselves with by internalizing negative stereotypes of getting older, that then act as self-fulfilling prophecies in the opposite way to confidence. And it's I guess the last thing I would just say, our whole mental models about aging are based on 100-year-old misconceptions about the aging brain. The aging brain can maintain its function at levels not that different from younger people, but only if you have the confidence to do the stuff, to engage, and to get rid of the morale sapping negative stereotypes. So that's my next book that'll be coming out next year. Is about brain aging and how the awful loss of resources and of people's zest for life that happens because of misconceptions about aging. And it can happen to people who start worrying about their 50th birthday, their 60th birthday. It's not just about 70s, 80s.
Even just in the confidence book, there's a study where you talk about and it's simply if people thought that their age might cognitively impair them in a particular test, they tended to do worse in
Oh yeah.
that test.
And
Yeah.
if you test older people in a youth dominant environment like a white coated university lab compared to in a kind of community center being tested by an older person of their age, their memory will be much better in the latter situation than the former, because these youth-related ageist attitudes subtract from they use up mental capacity, kind of worrying about your performance, worrying about your age, in where there are these messages about age. So yeah.
And by the way, we don't have to discuss this if it's too much for right now. But essentially, can someone who's maybe in their 70s, 80s, can someone like that do something like acquire a language, learn an instrument? Is that off the cards for people?
Absolutely not off the cards. I'm learning jazz piano myself at the moment, and um, uh, the human brain, the human brain at any age is plastic. It can learn. Now, your learning will take longer in your 70s or 80s than it does, but if you just keep practicing, you will learn to play good piano or learn that language. But what happens is, if you're not confident about it, you say things like, "I'm too old for this," and that's the self-fulfilling negative prophecy, and that's what confident aging has to combat.
Ian Robertson, I think that's a really positive note to finish on. Thanks again for doing this. Lastly, where can people find you and find out more about you, and of course buy your book?
So ianrobertson.org, and books on Amazon as well. So How Confidence Works, and also The Winner Effect as well, which is the precursor to How Confidence Works.
Excellent. Ian Robertson, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks, Connor.